We are hearing news about a lot of layoffs happening because of AI. We are also hearing about software engineering coming to an extension and is almost dead.
Building in this time is easy because you have all these agentic coding systems. I also don't write a lot of code anymore.
How do you stick to your roadmap while meeting the needs of your customer?
We use a lot of Anthropic's agent SDK. I was talking to the CFO of a US company. They mandated anything we do with AI should either increase our revenue, should reduce headcount.
So, hi friends, welcome back to our podcast. Today, we are going to talk about something that is most trending in the market. There have been trends and we are hearing news about a lot of layoffs happening because of AI. We are also hearing about software engineering coming to an extension and is almost dead, as many people are saying in the market. But on the other side, there is a new role which is kind of increasingly getting more and more prevalent in the market with the called forward deployed engineer. And today I have Tushar here with me to learn more about what this role is all about and how it is getting even more critical in this new world of AI and how it is getting more and more relevance in the market. So for that, I welcome Tushar to our show. Thank you, Tushar, for joining us.
Thank you, Abhishek. Thanks for having me here. So, quick introduction about myself. I am a forward deployed engineer at Treasure Data, and I build enterprise grade AI agents for Fortune 500 companies. And I think we'll be talking a lot about, the nitty gritties of how these things are built and what the role means and stuff like that. But excited to be here.
Thanks, Tushar. To start with, let's look into what this role is about. This role is not new. It was essentially evangelized by Palantir almost 2 decades back. But now with more and more AI companies seems to be getting and ramping up this role even aggressively. Why do you think this role is so critical in terms of deploying these solutions into the production environment?
I think AI solutions in this day and age are more about figuring out the best and most optimal way to deploy a solution. And it's unlike traditional enterprise SaaS, where you have one solution and it gets deployed, people get onboarded to it for a few weeks, and then everything works just fine. These AI systems are point solutions and have to be hyper customized to whatever those requirements are of the end user. And so I think the FDE role as such is responsible for figuring out what the customer requires, what existing solutions you can deploy, and then how do you make sure these things run in production reliably and to the expectations of customers. So I think a lot of companies like Anthropic calls it their applied AI team. OpenAI calls it deployment engineers. My company calls it just the FDE role. But what you're looking at is a product manager who writes his own tickets and then ships the code as well and makes sure everything runs. So it's a full stack thing that you're working with.
Very interesting. So I think what you are alluding to is that even this role itself has got many names in the market. Some people are calling it with the applied AI role. Some people are calling it as, like you said, right, OpenAI bringing on board these engineers. So seems like it's coming up with many roles, but let's further understand how this role is evolving and what kind of roles and responsibility does it entail. And to get into that, I wanted to learn, there have been many roles in the market, right? For example, solutions architect role, pre-sales engineer role, customer success role. To that effect, also the production support engineers or lead engineers. How is and why is a forward deployed engineer role different from all the other roles that already have in the market?
I would say the FDE role as such is a combination of all these roles that you mentioned, but usually sits somewhere between research and development and sales. So you're looking at building innovative solutions, but then also communicating how these solutions work to potentially new customers or existing customers and figuring out the best way to deploy them. So I would say whatever this role is called, if it's client facing, you would expect this person to be sitting somewhere between like core innovation and sales, because pre-sales you're building out solutions as pilots, post sales you're looking at making sure these solutions run in production for like contract renewal, stuff like that. So I think it's super important to have a mixture of the two, and that's how usually the FD role operates.
Very interesting. So I think what you are describing here is that it's becoming more and more cross-functional, and as these AI companies are pushing forward to deploy these systems in enterprises where the adoption is still at the initial stages, while the technical capabilities are far ahead, enterprises are still lagging behind. Seems like some of these MIT reports that talk about 95% of the solutions not reaching to the production, seems like this is that missing puzzle where how do you make sure that these systems actually get deployed into customer environment? How do you push for adoption? Requires somebody who understands an end to end, the customer environment, understands the tech stack, and be able to bridge the gap between the two.
Yep. And I think building in this time is easy because you have all these agentic coding systems. Personally, I also don't write a lot of code anymore. I have a lot of like these skills that Anthropic came out with that I use to write code and then review it. But what you're looking at is, these systems need to work in production, have to be reliable, and have to be oftentimes very simple. Like you can have multiple agents working together on a, say, like a customer wants to automate their insurance claim pipeline, or someone wants to automate their customer service tickets, or a marketing team is looking to just have a natural language to SQL agent. Usually these solutions are simple, at least the ones that work in production, but you have to figure out the way to do it. You can have Claude Code or Codex or Cursor or whatever running, but making sure it's reliable when hundreds of users are using it, it works still, latency, all of those things need to be considered. And as an FDE, I try to build simple stuff because it'll be me later on who fixes, when production incidents happen.
Your on the ground experience of working as a forward deployed engineer. From the prod standpoint, these AI systems tend to be very finicky, right? These are non-deterministic systems. Often they hallucinate. They've got latency issues when operating at scale. They frequently get into the cost escalation. From your experience perspective, when working for deploying these agents at scale in production, what are the typical issues that you see, and how do you help resolve those, and what are the best practices for everyone to consider?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question. A lot of customers ask me the same, that how do I know this thing is going to work? And some common issues that come across are semantic drift, which is you're having a conversational AI agent, and let's say it's a natural language to SQL query agent, a very simple setup. But you're talking to your data set just in English, asking questions, and you've had a lot of back and forths with this AI. Oftentimes it might forget what the objective of your first question was. So that's an issue that we have to figure out with, like, maybe a tool call that makes sure that if the context goes beyond a certain limit, a deterministic output is provided. There's various ways to solve for that. There's also the issue of garbage in, garbage out. So what that means is that for any agent that works on like a retrieval augmented generation system, the retrieval is dependent on all the data that's available.
Sure.
So if your data layer is not in order, or say there's 5 tables for customer transactions and you're asking an agent about some transaction level data, of course it's going to like drift into various scenarios. So that's again an issue. So a lot of my time gets spent in figuring out that data foundation and then building something on top of it. And then from like a leadership perspective, I think it's very important to set the expectation with a customer leadership as to what this agent can and cannot do, for their use case. Sometimes I've run into scenarios where a production system is expected to do things it is not meant for.
Sure.
So it's very important to say that, okay, these are my 4 or 5 use cases that this AI system will be used for, and anything beyond it might need additional customization or an entirely new agent. So I think that's got more to do with like how fluent different, teams are. Sometimes these teams are technical, sometimes customer teams are non-technical, and AI outputs can be misconstrued as just this doesn't work. That has to be managed as well sometimes.
So that's a very interesting response that I'm getting from you. From production setup, you are talking about not just the technical issues that you have to face, but also the non-technical aspects of, working with the leaders, aligning them. The AI fluency aspect of it is also something that is critical for driving the adoption of these systems, at scale. So thank you for that response. Moving on, Tushar, I wanted to learn, like you said, as a forward deployed engineer, you are pretty much cross functional. You're very hands on using these agentic development tools. You can speak to the client, make sure that you are able to integrate these systems with their legacy applications, be able to integrate with their APIs. In this journey, as you are working to deploy your platform or your solution into the customer context, there is always a chance that you drift towards over customizing your solution or your platform specific to the customer needs. How do you maintain or align yourself or balance out, what is it that needs to happen, and how do you stick to your roadmap while meeting the needs of your customer?
Yeah, again, a very common scenario that I face, that hyper customized solutions or
Sure.
expectations from
Yeah.
customers. And while that is the case, you sometimes do need to have that level of hyper customization. But as an FDE, my role is to also sometimes push back on customer expectations, which means that telling them that, hey, this, we can fulfill up to a certain number of use cases, but then beyond that, you might need another agent to do that. Not because, we don't want to do it, or we don't want to build more agents, but a single agent can only handle as much context. So if you are going beyond a lot of use cases, you want to split that across different agents as opposed to building one big multi-agent orchestration setup. So that's something that I do with customers, pushing back. Sometimes it's also prescriptive, that I quote other examples of successful deployments with customers and tell whoever I'm talking to that, hey, we built this for customer XYZ. They are using it in production, and they're seeing great results. I think that builds a lot of trust, because they want to hear that this has been deployed elsewhere. There is a proof of concept in production with another Fortune 500 company,
Sure.
and that works a lot. And the third point is, I always look for replicable solutions. So if I build something for a customer, can I reuse it with a minimal level of customization? Because my mandate is to like set up something in 2-3 days as a pilot and then put it into production later. So I can't like build stuff from scratch in 2-3 days. I mean, right now you can, but production reliability is different. So I think that's the approach I take.
That's a good response in terms of how you approach this. I specifically like the point about increasing the awareness of the client itself. AI being so new, the technology itself is evolving. I think a lot of times making the client aware of what is actually possible, the art of possible, what are the other use cases or the solutions that are implemented. I think that is very critical for everybody to understand how this kind of works, and also the aspect of the repeatability, right? I think that is where what I can also understand now from you is that, from the repeatability standpoint, while you are implementing the solution for a customer, that capability then becomes a repeatable package for other customers where this can be deployed, right? So it becomes critical for you to gain that intelligence and package it back into your product roadmap. So in that way, you are able to drive intelligence and be able to build your product roadmap while giving awareness to your customers in terms of what you have already developed. So that kind of feedback loop is critical. So thanks, Tushar, for that response. Let's move a step further from the architectural standpoint. When you're building these systems for prod level of deployment, AI model or the foundational models, the FM models that we talk, is just, one component of the entire solution stack.
Yeah.
From your perspective, when you're building these systems, right, what kind of typical architectural considerations or decisions you need to make for implementing these solutions?
Again, I think all these questions are super relevant to what I usually encounter. So all of this starts with the architectural decision, starts with the use case. So figuring out if it's even an agentic use case to begin with. Like, do you need an agent? What level of autonomous decision making is required in your current workflow? If it's agentic, that means some decisions can be handed off to these AI models, and then everything proceeds from there. If it doesn't need an agent, maybe it's just a simple RAG with an LLM. You don't need anything agentic. It's one LLM call and then one RAG setup, and the LLM gets the retrieved information from a database or a set of text knowledge bases or whatever. So that once that's figured out, I think it becomes like the idea is about like, how do you set this up then? So if it's an agentic use case, then do you want to set up things as a multi-agent framework? Because if this involves a lot of tools, so there can be a tool for calling a search API, there can be a tool for running a query, There can be a tool to retrieve information from your vector database. There can be a tool for summarizing the outputs or whatever. So how do you figure out which tools do you need for that use case? And then can those tools fit into a single agent? Usually you would see that an agent would work well with like 8 to 10 tools. After that, there will be issues where it's, inaccurate in calling its tools and stuff like that. So beyond 8 to 10 tools, you want to switch to, like, you want to have like multiple agents handling your entire workflow. And then a lot of customers need these deployments on prem. So, they want everything to be deployed on their server as opposed to us providing them like a full infrastructure for deploying these agents. So that again is a decision that has to be made, and then I get work with their engineering team to do it. And once all of this is figured out, what agentic framework are you using? We use a lot of Anthropic's Agent SDK. It released last year in sometime mid last year, but there's many frameworks out there. Crew AI, LangChain, LangGraph. Those are frameworks I have used. All of them are Python based, which makes it easier for tool calling if you're using services like Fast API to make those API tool calls and stuff like that. But yeah, once this decision is made, I think the idea is, how do you deploy this for multiple concurrent users with security, reliability, and all of it comes together. And ideally, the process should look very simple. You don't want to create multiple agents for a simple use case. You want to keep it as clean as possible. So that's like the technical approach.
From that standpoint, right, once you have designed the architecture, and we have also spoken about deploying this solution, you also spoke about some of the key challenges that we face when these systems are running in production. There are scenarios, right, once the system has been deployed in production, how do you make sure that it is performing well, it is meeting the accuracy, it's not drifting? How do you put in guardrails to make sure the system is providing the appropriate responses, and all the security considerations that you originally designed for are still intact? So what is it that goes into this post production deployment monitoring aspect of these systems?
Yeah, again, question that I get from all customers, that, hey, how do I make sure this is a reliable system? So there's a few ways to do that. Usually there's a quantitative and a qualitative approach. Quantitative, you create golden data set which has a set of questions and a set of deterministic answers. So the agent is judged on true or false, pass or fail, and there's various metrics to that end. So like there's precision k, recall k, pass k. Some of the common ones that I use. Precision k means that out of k, are you getting all k agent questions? If the agent is asked k questions or n questions, is it answering every question right every time? So this is for more high stakes scenarios like financial transactions or insurance claims. You want the agent to be as precise as possible. Recall k is out of k questions, is the agent able to answer at least one correctly? So like, or how many is it answering correctly? So that's for more generic use cases, which perhaps doesn't need a lot of precision. Of course, everything has to be still very precise. We're talking like at least an 85 to 90% pass rate, but depends on which metric you want to use. And these are discussions that I have with customers. So it's not that I build an evaluation framework and we just push it out, but it's in congruence with what the customer expects. And then pass k is probability that the agent will answer 1 out of k questions correctly. That again has very specific use cases where it can be used, particularly in non-deterministic use cases, because you want to, you don't know if the agent will answer correctly or not. And then qualitatively, you can use LLM as a judge methods, where there's another agent evaluating your main agent's output and judging on metrics like how concise the output is it verbose or not, and like other qualitative metrics. So that, I think, is together how you sort of evaluate these systems. And I think one important thing I want to mention here is a lot of customers expect that everything will be solved with my AI agent. And I think that's where we have to, as forward deployed engineers, make it clear that the best AI models out there are also at like 85-90% on state of the art metrics for like PhD level tasks. So this will not solve everything. It will make mistakes.
Correct.
And that has to be a part of the understanding of this production deployment.
I think one of the aspect when you were describing about these metrics in the beginning, right, from the quantitative aspect of it, one of the thing that is absolutely needed for that is some sort of grounding data.
Yep.
Right. How do you prepare that grounding data for evaluating these agents in production, and how do you make sure that grounding data is getting refreshed, on a continuous basis?
So grounding data sets, of course, are very pointed to every use case. So let's say I am working with the marketing analytics team of a particular company, and they want to build an agent that is able to query and explore their database using natural language. So in this case, usually the marketing team would have a very large set of SQL queries they already have because they've been doing this for years, and they would have some data that's validated. So I work with these teams to figure out, like, okay, what is the ground truth data here that we want to use. Oftentimes we call it the golden data set against which this agent would be tested. So now once this is prepared, we have a cadence of refreshing it as well, like an evaluation cadence of the entire agent, that it will be evaluated once every month, or once every 2 weeks if it's more high stakes data like finance or transaction. And then we proceed from there. But I would say it's a challenging task to arrive at that ground truth data. I think the use case I describe is simple because you have SQL returns some data, and it becomes your ground truth. But if it's more qualitative, like insurance claims, there will be multiple use cases that can be super unique, and figuring out like the entire universe of those use cases for insurance claims and then putting together a set of ground truth can be a time consuming task, and sometimes can be non-deterministic as well. So you have to start somewhere. Then, once you arrive at a certain level of reliability, you add more use cases to your ground truth data.
Got it. And then interestingly, at the very beginning, you also spoke about, even the state of the art or the SOTA models are still at 85 or 90% at a PhD level. For that remaining 10%, how do you manage or handle those scenarios for customer, right? Of course, the customer would not want a 90% accurate solution.
Yeah.
For that 10%, how do you handle or manage that?
Yeah, I think that's the interesting part of my job, which is where I try to work together with the middle management in these customers. So these customer teams will have like a whole set of like middle management folks who I get onboarded as the human in the loop, who will provide feedback to this agentic system.
Sure.
So while this AI makes their lives easier, the responsibility of these middle management folks to make sure that they're providing feedback to the agent. So I'll take an example here. Was working with an automotive company that we built an agent for, and I had to tell them that, hey, sometimes your AI system will make mistakes, and if you can ask it to course correct, it will course correct. And I had to do some enablement sessions on that. Common model failure patterns. So Anthropic's models has some common failure patterns. OpenAI has different failure patterns. So, if Anthropic, Claude, if you prompt it to make a plan and always give a plan before doing something, it will do much better on accuracy and evaluation metrics, as opposed to like a one shot prompt that do this.
Sure.
So those kind of techniques, I think I'm also learning a lot myself, because Anthropic releases a new model every week. OpenAI comes up with something else. So you have to figure out what those failure patterns are and communicate it with the team. So you're essentially almost part of this middle management team. Like, you cannot be disjoint from them. You're working with them, you're considering them as your team members and making sure they know how to use these AIs as best as
Makes sense. So essentially what you're saying, human in the loop is that, that glue that fulfills that 10% of that gap.
Yep.
While models can still do 85 to 90%, but for the remaining set, you still need that human in the loop. Moving on, I think there is another constant debate that we hear in the market. If you're investing into AI, what is the efficiency that you are providing? Or what kind of efficacy or effectiveness this solution is going to bring in the organization? How do you manage those kind of questions that customers often throw at you, right? And what kind of use cases do you implement in organization, and how are you able to prove the cost effectiveness or the efficiency or the efficacy of those?
Yeah, I think from like an executive leadership point of view, this question often comes up when I'm talking to C-level executives at customers, who ask me that, okay, fine, we build this agent, but how do I measure the value it's going to bring to our organization? Which is where I think a lot of the times you have these discussions around business value frameworks that, okay, if you're building a churn prevention agent, or if you're having, a data cleaning or data onboarding agent, or if you're building just a marketing analytics agent, you will be able to, uncover insights about your data that otherwise would have taken a lot of time to uncover, through traditional data science teams, and then relying on that setup. So then what is the potential revenue you can increase by having a churn prevention agent, where this churn prevention agent is looking at your customer data set, figuring out which customers are at risk of churn, and doing that real time. So that's a business value discussion we have with leadership teams. A lot of times, so for example, I was talking to the CFO of a US company where they mandated that, hey, like anything we do with AI should either increase our revenue, should reduce headcount. And, like, we're not building systems to reduce headcount, even though that's being weaponized to some extent right now, where, companies are saying we'll cut workforce because AI can make stuff more optimized, and, we'll save on resources. That's a separate discussion. I won't get into that. But I think we focus a lot on how AI systems can improve efficiency and revenue potential. So that's where we pivot to. And I was working with this automotive company in the US, where we showed them how they were saving tens of hundreds of hours by using an analytics agent, as opposed to relying on like traditional data science teams to do that, to uncover insights about their marketing campaigns. So I think that's a discussion we always have. And I think that's where soft skills of communicating technical stuff to non-technical audiences who have entirely different, focus areas, comes in hand.
Interesting. So seems like, the way I'm reading your response, there is a dilemma in this C-suite, right? On one side, they are reaching out for building out these solutions. They have the mandate of, driving these AI implementations in the organization. But on the other side, they are asking you hard questions of justifying the ROI or the value coming out of these. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think sometimes people ask me clear questions that, will this AI system pay for itself? And then you have to talk about like the business value discussion that I was just mentioning, revenue potential, uncovering new insights in a matter of minutes as opposed to days or weeks, stuff like that. But on my end, as a forward deployed engineer, I am responsible for making sure these AI systems are optimized for the cost that they incur to run, like the LLM input output token cost, overall general compute infrastructure cost. But at the same time, my mandate is to increase and drive adoption and consumption too. Like we want more and more customers to use our systems while also optimizing them, which becomes a game of like, okay, I'm optimizing my input output tokens through creative ways. There's stuff like token oriented object notation, stuff like that. But at the same time, I want people to just keep using our systems as well, because at the end of the day, a lot of stuff is driven by revenue also. So I think those are, depending on the customer and how AI forward they are, I think you have to pivot your pitch accordingly.
Just wanted to understand from you, right, as this role is evolving in the market, there's so much of demand, right? What would be your advice to the software engineers, the solution architects who are in these adjacent roles to a forward deployed engineer, who are aspiring to become one? What is it that they should be looking after to aspire for this role?
I think very important question, because I get a lot of inbounds from students in grad school or my friends and colleagues who are asking that, hey, like, what does it take to be in one of these roles? And I think right now with all these agentic coding platforms, it's easy to ship stuff. But what you need to be good at or figure out is, how do these systems work in production? How quickly can you deploy them? How well do they evaluate against test data sets, stuff like that. But I think one of the bare minimums from a technical skill point of view is to have a lot of open source projects that you're maintaining. So Anthropic just, I think a few weeks back, just released this had a press release saying that they will give $10,000 worth of Claude API credit to open source maintainers, which means that the bare minimum is to keep building stuff and have something that you can show in interviews, or you're making a LinkedIn post about, or building something that you want to use yourself. So I built an agent which takes in the news about AI and latest developments and gives me a nice summary every day in the morning.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I think that's the bare minimum from a technical point of view. You don't need to grind on lead code or do a traditional stuff. Like some interviews will ask you that system design, but what you need to know from a technical point of view is, can you debug a big stack trace of API errors? So you have like trace errors, lot of errors. How can you debug that? What's the best way to do that? Because in production, you will be using those techniques. And then from a soft skill point of view, I think a lot of these job descriptions of FDEs, they say things like you have to be a technical Navy SEAL with good judgment, or you will be parachuted into some production issue that you have to fix in 2 days, or model calm and good judgment in a high stakes environment. Those are very, like, you will see those in job descriptions all the time for FDE roles. So an example being, and this comes from a top tier AI research labs interview that they asked, where they asked that a customer messages you on a Friday evening saying that your agent is not responding the way it should. There's a production incident. What do you do? How do you handle that? Because that's not just technical skills. That's a customer that you have to build trust with, and then, figure out a process to not just figure out a root cause of that issue, but also make sure the customer feels that they're being listened to. And that part of an FD role. And I think those things you learn as you're working, but really it's about having a mindset of this can be fixed.
Sure.
There is no other option. For me personally, when I step into such situations, it's like, yeah, I have 2 days, I have to figure it out, do whatever it takes to make sure things work.
So essentially, I think I really liked your response, because I did not hear about, doing certification X, Y, or Z, your background, your education. Seems like it's all now boiling down to your practical hands-on knowledge of how you can do it on the ground. And now it also makes sense, right? AI systems themselves, or these technologies evolving so fast. Doing any certification, or by the time you're graduating, the knowledge that you have had is already outdated, right? So that's where I think what you're alluding to is now becoming more and more hands-on, learning it on the ground, being very practical about it, ability to handle pressure in the client environment. I think those are some of the traits that people should be aspiring for this new role.
Absolutely.
So perfect. Thank you everyone for listening to us. As you heard from Tushar here with me, great thoughts, Tushar. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me here, Abhishek.